"Sir, you'll need to move. That seat is reserved for another passenger." The words cut through the quiet cabin like a blade, sharp enough to make nearby travelers look up from their phones and coffee cups. Business class had been calm just seconds earlier. Soft lighting, low conversations, the steady hum of conditioned air. Then everything changed. Marcus Reynolds looked up slowly from seat 3A. He was dressed in a plain black t-shirt, dark jeans, and white sneakers. Nothing about him suggested private boardrooms, billion-dollar investments, or executive influence. That was exactly why he preferred traveling this way. Across the aisle, a few passengers exchanged glances. Some assumed there had been a mistake. Others simply watched. Nicole Bennett, the lead flight attendant, stood beside Marcus with her arms folded and a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "I'm going to need you to gather your things," she said. "This seat is being reassigned." Marcus glanced at the boarding pass resting on the tray table. Seat 3A. Business class. Confirmed. Paid in full. He looked back at Nicole. "Reassigned to who?" he asked calmly. Before Nicole could answer, a tall white passenger carrying an expensive leather briefcase stepped into the aisle. Ethan Walker, mid-50s, confident, impatient, the kind of traveler who acted as if airports existed solely for his convenience. Nicole immediately turned toward him. "Mr. Walker, we're taking care of it." Ethan nodded as though the outcome had never been in doubt. Then he looked directly at Marcus. "There seems to be some confusion," he said. "That's my seat." Marcus didn't move, didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He simply held up his boarding pass. Nicole barely glanced at it. "Sir, let's not make this difficult." Around them, conversation stopped. A woman near the window lowered her tablet. A college student removed one earbud. An older couple paused halfway through a discussion about their connection in Denver. The cabin wasn't quiet anymore. It was charged. Marcus folded the boarding pass and placed it carefully into his pocket. "I've already boarded," he said. "I've already been seated. So why exactly am I being asked to move?" Nicole's expression tightened. "Because this matter has already been resolved." Ethan smirked and slid his briefcase into the overhead compartment above Marcus's row as though the seat already belonged to him. "Look," Ethan said, loud enough for several rows to hear. "Sometimes people end up where they aren't supposed to be. It happens." A few uncomfortable faces turned away. Others kept watching. Marcus met Ethan's gaze. There was no anger in his eyes. No embarrassment. Just patience. The kind of patience that comes from seeing the same story play out too many times before. Nicole stepped closer. "Sir, if you refuse to cooperate, I'll have to involve the captain." Marcus nodded once. Slowly, deliberately. Then he leaned back into the seat and spoke 6 words that would change everything within the next 10 minutes. "Then maybe you should call him." Marcus Reynolds did not look away from Nicole. He did not reach for his bag. He did not stand. Instead, he settled deeper into the seat as if he had all the time in the world. That calm seemed to bother her more than an argument ever could. Around the cabin, passengers continued watching, waiting for someone to explain what was happening. Nicole pressed a button on the cabin phone mounted near the galley. Her voice dropped into a professional tone, but the tension underneath was impossible to miss. Marcus could hear only fragments of the conversation. A seat dispute. Passenger refusing instructions. Possible escalation. The words floated through the air like accusations. Across the aisle, Ethan Walker looked increasingly comfortable. He loosened his jacket, checked his watch, and smiled at a passing flight attendant as though he had already won. Marcus noticed every detail. Not because he cared about the seat, because he cared about the pattern. For nearly 6 months, reports had been arriving on executive desks. Complaints, customer surveys, anonymous employee statements. Travelers describing situations that felt strangely similar. Certain passengers questioned more often than others. Certain customers asked for additional verification. Certain travelers quietly moved, delayed, or inconvenienced. None of the individual complaints seemed large enough to make national headlines. Together, however, they painted a picture Marcus could not ignore. That was why he was sitting there now. Not as a billionaire investor. Not as an executive. Not as a public figure. Just another passenger. Or at least that was what everyone believed. Marcus preferred it that way. Expensive suits attracted attention. Attention changed behavior. When people knew power was watching, they behaved differently. The truth only appeared when nobody thought it mattered. A young woman in a Navy airline uniform emerged from the galley carrying a tablet. Her name tag read Maya Brooks. She looked no older than 24. She glanced at Marcus, then at Nicole, then at the seat assignment displayed on her screen. Something about her expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough to suggest confusion. Nicole noticed it immediately. "Is there a problem?" she asked. Maya hesitated. "No, ma'am." But her eyes drifted back to the tablet. Marcus noticed that too. Near the window, a woman in her 40s quietly lowered her magazine. 2 rows behind Ethan, a businessman removed his headphones. The cabin had become an audience. Nobody wanted to admit it, but everyone sensed something was off. Ethan finally broke the silence. "Look, I travel every week. Mistakes happen. Let us solve this and move on." Marcus turned toward him. Interesting choice of words. Ethan frowned. "What does that mean?" Marcus smiled faintly. "You said let us solve this. I was not aware we were solving anything together." Several passengers exchanged glances. Ethan's confidence wavered for the first time. Nicole stepped back into the conversation before he could respond. "The captain has been informed. He will be here shortly." Marcus nodded once. "Good." The answer seemed to surprise her. Most passengers would have been nervous. Most passengers would have started defending themselves. Marcus simply folded his hands and waited. Because while everyone else believed a captain was coming to settle a seating dispute, Marcus knew something much larger was already beginning to unfold. The first officer arrived before the captain. His name tag read Daniel Harper, and the moment he stepped into business class, the atmosphere shifted again. People straightened in their seats. Nicole immediately moved toward him, eager to control the narrative before anyone else could speak. "This passenger is refusing a seating adjustment," she said. "We have another customer assigned to this seat." Daniel looked at Marcus, then at Ethan, then at the boarding pass still resting in Marcus's hand. For a brief second, uncertainty crossed his face. It disappeared almost immediately. "Sir," Daniel said, adopting the calm tone of someone trying to end an inconvenience. "We need your cooperation so we can depart on time." Marcus nodded. "I agree completely." Daniel seemed relieved. "Good. Then please move to the seat assigned by the crew." Marcus looked around the cabin. Every eye seemed fixed on him now. "Interesting," he replied. "Because nobody has shown me any updated assignment." The words landed heavily. A businessman 3 rows back slowly lowered his laptop. A woman near the aisle exchanged a glance with her husband. The question sounded reasonable. Too reasonable. Nicole stepped in before Daniel could answer. "The system has already been updated." Marcus turned toward her. "Then it should be easy to show me." Silence. Just a few seconds, but long enough for passengers to notice. Ethan shifted in place. His confidence had begun developing small cracks. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "We are holding up an entire flight over 1 seat." Marcus looked directly at him. "No. We are holding up a flight because someone changed something and does not want to explain why." The cabin grew even quieter. Daniel extended his hand toward Nicole. "Let me see the assignment." For the first time, Nicole hesitated. Only briefly. Then she handed over the tablet. Daniel studied the screen. His expression remained neutral, but Maya noticed something. So did Marcus. The first officer had expected to see certainty. Instead, he was finding questions. Maya stood near the galley pretending to organize service items. Her eyes never left the tablet. She had checked the seating manifest less than 20 minutes earlier. She remembered. Seat 3A clearly. She remembered the name attached to it. Marcus Reynolds. Confirmed. Paid. Cleared. Nothing unusual. Yet now the screen showed Ethan Walker. Something did not fit. Across the cabin, whispers began spreading like wind through dry leaves. Some passengers sided with Nicole. Others were beginning to doubt her version of events. The cabin was no longer united. It had divided into camps. One side saw a difficult traveler refusing instructions. The other saw a man asking simple questions nobody seemed willing to answer. Daniel finally handed the tablet back. "The captain is on his way." Nicole immediately nodded as though that settled everything. Ethan smiled again, but neither noticed Maya quietly pulling up a backup record on her own device. And neither noticed the way Marcus remained completely relaxed. He was not acting like someone worried about losing a seat. He was acting like someone waiting for the truth to arrive. And somewhere beyond the aircraft door, that truth was already moving faster than anyone inside the cabin realized. Maya Brooks stared at the screen for a second time, then a third. The numbers did not change. The passenger manifest she had reviewed before boarding still sat in the airline system archive, and according to that record, seat 3A belonged to Marcus Reynolds. She swallowed hard. New employees were taught to trust the chain of command. They were also taught to trust the system. Right now, the two were telling completely different stories. Nicole remained focused on controlling the cabin. Ethan stood nearby with growing impatience. The first officer had stepped away to update the captain. Yet the question hanging over business class refused to disappear. If Ethan had always been assigned the seat, why did the earlier record show Marcus? Maya quietly opened another screen and checked the timestamp history. Her heartbeat quickened. A modification had been made less than 20 minutes earlier. That alone was unusual. Seat assignments rarely changed after passengers had already boarded. She looked up toward Marcus. He sat exactly where he had been all along. Calm, composed, not scrolling through his phone, not arguing, not demanding special treatment, just watching. It was the kind of confidence that made people curious. Across the aisle, a woman named Jennifer Cole lowered her phone after pretending to text. She had been observing everything from the beginning. Something does not make sense, she whispered to her husband. He nodded. I was thinking the same thing. A few rows behind them, another passenger quietly activated the camera on his phone. Nobody was posting videos. Nobody was creating a scene. But people were beginning to document what they were seeing. The atmosphere felt different now. Less like a disagreement. More like a puzzle. Maya looked back at the system and noticed another detail. The updated assignment showed no authorization code attached to the change. Her training had covered that. Every adjustment required documentation. Every modification left a trail. This one appeared incomplete. Her stomach tightened. Nicole suddenly approached the galley. Maya, is everything ready? Maya locked her screen. Yes, ma'am. Nicole studied her for a moment before walking away. The interaction lasted only seconds, but Marcus noticed it. So did several passengers. The tension in the cabin had become visible. Not loud, not chaotic, just present, like distant thunder before a storm. Maya waited until Nicole disappeared into the forward galley. Then she reopened the records. This time she took screenshots. One of the original assignment. One of the modified version. One of the timestamp history. Her finger hesitated above the save button. Reporting concerns could create problems. Staying silent could create bigger ones. She remembered why she joined the airline in the first place. Professionalism, integrity, accountability. The words printed inside every training manual. Slowly, she pressed save. At that exact moment, the captain emerged from the cockpit. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Even Ethan straightened his posture. The captain's arrival felt like the moment everyone had been waiting for. Nicole immediately moved toward him with confidence returning to her face. But Maya no longer looked confident. She looked concerned, because sitting quietly inside her device was proof that the story being told inside business class was no longer matching the facts. Captain Richard Cole stepped into business class with the measured confidence of someone accustomed to making final decisions. The conversations faded immediately. Even the low hum of anticipation seemed to settle around him. Nicole approached first, speaking quickly and quietly, presenting her version of events before anyone else could. Richard listened without interruption. Then he turned toward Marcus. Sir, I understand there is a seating issue. Marcus looked up calmly. There is a documentation issue. The seat is only part of it. Richard nodded, though his expression suggested he had already reached a conclusion. We need to prepare for departure. I am asking you one final time to relocate, so we can resolve this after takeoff. The words landed heavily across the cabin. Several passengers shifted uneasily. Jennifer looked down at her phone. The businessman behind her shook his head slightly. Marcus remained seated. Respectfully, Captain, I purchased this seat. I boarded with this seat. I was seated in this seat. If something changed afterward, I would appreciate seeing the record. Richard folded his arms. The crew has already verified the assignment. Maya felt her stomach tighten. She glanced down at the screenshots stored on her device. The evidence sitting inches from her hands told a very different story. Ethan stepped forward, sensing momentum returning to his side. This has gone on long enough, he said. Everyone here wants to leave. Marcus looked at him for a moment. Everyone here also deserves honesty. The cabin fell silent again. Richard's patience appeared to be wearing thin. Sir, refusal to follow crew instructions creates operational concerns. It was not a threat. Not exactly. But the implication hung in the air. Marcus had heard similar language before. Years ago, decades ago, the memory surfaced without warning. He was 22 years old, standing inside a crowded airport terminal in Atlanta, fresh out of college, carrying a worn briefcase and a one-way ticket to a job interview that could change his life. A gate agent had questioned whether he belonged in a priority boarding line. Other passengers had been waved through without hesitation. Marcus had been asked to step aside, to wait, to verify, to explain. He remembered the looks, the assumptions, the quiet embarrassment. Most of all, he remembered promising himself that success would protect him from moments like that. Years later, he learned the truth. Success changed your address. It changed your bank account. It changed your title. But sometimes it did not change the assumptions people made when they first saw you. The memory faded. Marcus returned to the present. Richard was still waiting. Nicole was still watching. Ethan still looked certain he would soon have the seat. But something else had changed. The passengers were no longer simply observing. They were evaluating, measuring every word, every reaction, every inconsistency. Then Maya took a slow breath. Her hands trembled slightly as she stepped away from the galley. She knew exactly what the screenshots showed. She knew exactly what the timestamps revealed. And for the first time since this began, she realized remaining silent was no longer the safest choice. The moment Maya stepped forward, the cabin seemed to hold its breath. Nicole noticed immediately. So did Captain Richard Cole. Is there something you need? Richard asked. Maya swallowed carefully. Every instinct told her to stay quiet. Every training manual told her to report discrepancies. The two instincts collided in the center of her chest. Captain, she said, her voice steady despite the pressure. I reviewed the seating records. Nicole's expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for Marcus to notice. This is not the time, Nicole said quickly. Maya continued anyway. The original manifest showed seat 3A assigned to Mr. Reynolds. Silence followed. Heavy silence. The kind that makes people stop pretending not to listen. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Richard looked from Maya to Nicole. Are you certain? Maya nodded. I checked multiple times. Nicole stepped forward immediately. The system was updated. Maya lifted her device. Yes, ma'am. It was updated after boarding. The words landed like stones in still water. Ripples spread through the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances. Jennifer looked toward her husband. The businessman in the row behind Marcus slowly closed his laptop. Nobody spoke, but everyone understood what Maya was implying. Richard held out his hand. Let me see the records. Maya passed him the device. His eyes moved across the screen. First the original assignment, then the modified assignment, then the timestamp history. The longer he looked, the more serious his expression became. Nicole crossed her arms. There must be an explanation. Marcus finally spoke. I would be interested in hearing it. His voice remained calm. No anger. No triumph. Just patience. The patience of someone who had already seen how this story ended. Richard continued reviewing the records. Several long seconds passed. Then his company tablet vibrated. He glanced down. A new notification had appeared. Then another. Then a third. His brow furrowed. Nicole noticed. Captain. Richard did not answer immediately. Instead, he opened the first message. Marcus watched quietly. The timing was almost perfect. Thousands of feet below the aircraft, events were already moving through corporate channels. Not because Marcus had demanded it, because systems existed for moments exactly like this. Earlier, while everyone focused on the seat, Marcus had sent a single message. Nothing dramatic. Nothing emotional. Just 6 words. Begin executive audit. That message had reached a private operations team. The operations team had alerted legal review. Legal review had notified executive compliance. Executive compliance had started examining records in real time. No raised voices. No threats. Just process. The kind of process that moved quietly until it arrived all at once. Richard opened another notification. His face lost color. Then another. Then another. Across the aisle, Ethan noticed the change. What is happening? He asked. Nobody answered. Nicole took a step closer to the captain. Richard. He looked up slowly from the screen. For the first time since entering the cabin, he seemed uncertain. The messages in front of him were not asking questions. They were requesting immediate verification. Immediate documentation. Immediate explanations. And at the center of every request appeared the same name. Marcus Reynolds. The name seemed to freeze the entire cabin. Marcus Reynolds. It appeared again on Richard's screen. Then again in another notification. Then a third time in a message marked executive priority. Nicole's confidence began slipping away one piece at a time. "Why is corporate involved?" she asked quietly. Richard did not answer. He was still reading. The passengers watched him the way people watch a storm move across the horizon. Slowly. Inevitably. Ethan looked from Richard to Marcus and back again. "What exactly is going on?" he asked. This time there was uncertainty in his voice. Richard finally lifted his eyes from the tablet. "Mr. Reynolds," he said carefully, "would you mind explaining your connection to the company?" The question changed everything. The cabin became perfectly still. Even the whispers disappeared. Marcus stood slowly from seat 3A. Not dramatically, not triumphantly, simply standing as though he had been preparing for this moment from the beginning. He adjusted the sleeve of his shirt and looked around the cabin. At Nicole, at Ethan, at Richard, at Maya, at every passenger who had spent the last several minutes wondering why a simple seat assignment had turned into something much larger. "I was hoping the records would explain it for me," Marcus said. Richard swallowed. Nicole's face tightened. Marcus continued. "You asked me to give up a seat I paid for. You told me the system had changed. You insisted the documentation supported your decision." Nobody interrupted him. Nobody could. "The problem," Marcus said calmly, "is that the documentation never supported it." Richard lowered his eyes. The evidence sitting inside the system had already made that clear. Marcus took one step into the aisle. "You removed me from my assigned seat on an airline whose board I help oversee." The words landed with the force of complete silence. Ethan stared. Jennifer covered her mouth. The businessman near the rear of business class leaned back slowly as realization spread across his face. Maya felt her heart race. She had suspected something important. She had not expected this. Nicole blinked. "Board?" she whispered. Marcus nodded. "I am Marcus Reynolds. I serve on the Executive Oversight Committee responsible for customer experience audits." Nobody moved. The cabin looked less like an aircraft now and more like a room where reality had suddenly shifted. Richard's tablet vibrated again. A new message appeared. "Executive verification confirmed." Nicole saw it. Ethan saw it. Several passengers close enough to glimpse the screen saw it too. There was no doubt left. No misunderstanding. No missing information. Just truth. Marcus looked toward Maya. "Thank you for checking the records." Maya nodded quietly. Then he looked at Richard. "I did not stay in this seat because I wanted special treatment." His voice remained steady. "I stayed because every passenger deserves the same treatment." Richard lowered his head. Nicole had no response. Ethan looked away entirely. The cabin remained silent for several seconds. Then a woman near the window began clapping softly. Another passenger joined. Then another. The sound spread through business class, not because Marcus had won an argument, but because everyone had finally understood what the argument had really been about all along. The applause faded slowly, but the silence that followed felt even louder. Nicole stood frozen beside the aisle. Ethan remained near the overhead compartment, suddenly fascinated by anything other than the faces around him. Captain Richard Cole looked down at the stream of notifications continuing to arrive on his tablet. New messages, new requests, new instructions. The situation had moved far beyond business class. Somewhere inside the airline's headquarters, people were already reviewing records that had existed only minutes earlier. Richard opened another message. His expression tightened. Then another. The cabin watched him carefully. Nobody needed to ask what the messages contained. The answers were already written across his face. Nicole's company tablet suddenly emitted a short alert tone. Then another. She looked down. Her access screen refreshed automatically. A warning banner appeared requesting immediate contact with executive compliance. The color drained from her face. "What is this?" she whispered. Marcus remained calm. "The audit process." Nicole looked toward Richard, searching for reassurance. None came. Maya watched quietly from the galley. She felt no satisfaction, only relief. The truth had finally reached the surface. Jennifer leaned toward her husband and spoke softly. "Imagine if nobody had checked the records." He nodded. Then everyone would have believed the story they were told. Several passengers nearby heard the exchange. None disagreed. Ethan finally cleared his throat. This was obviously a misunderstanding. The words floated awkwardly into the silence. Marcus looked at him for a moment. A misunderstanding happens when people lack information. Ethan looked away. Marcus continued. This happened after information was ignored. No one challenged him. Not because he was powerful. Because everyone had witnessed the same sequence of events. Richard's tablet vibrated once more. This time he read the message completely before speaking. Executive Compliance has requested immediate statements from all personnel involved. Nicole lowered her eyes. The confidence she carried earlier had vanished entirely. Richard looked toward Marcus. Mr. Reynolds, I owe you an apology. Marcus nodded politely. I appreciate that, Captain. Richard took a breath. No passenger should have to prove they belong after purchasing a ticket. Several passengers quietly agreed. Maya looked out toward the rows of travelers. The atmosphere had changed. Earlier, people were divided. Some believed Marcus. Some believed the crew. Now the division was gone. Only clarity remained. Nicole's tablet sounded again. Another notice. Another acknowledgement request. Another reminder that every action leaves a record somewhere. She stared at the screen without speaking. Marcus glanced around the cabin one final time. He saw embarrassment on some faces. Reflection on others. But he also saw something else. Awareness. The kind that only appears after people witness a truth they cannot ignore. Outside the aircraft, ground crews continued their routines. Inside the cabin, however, something much more important had already happened. The assumptions that started this conflict had collapsed under the weight of simple facts. And for the first time since boarding began, nobody was talking about seat 3A anymore. Several minutes later, the aircraft finally pushed back from the gate. The tension that had filled business class earlier had been replaced by something quieter. Reflection. The engines hummed steadily beneath the cabin floor as the city lights began shrinking beyond the windows. Marcus Reynolds sat once again in seat 3A, the same seat that had started the entire chain of events. Yet now it felt almost irrelevant. The seat itself had never truly mattered. What mattered was everything people had assumed before they knew the facts. Across the aisle, passengers occasionally glanced toward him, not with curiosity anymore, but with respect. Some offered polite smiles when their eyes met his. Others simply nodded before returning to their books or laptops. Maya returned to her duties, though more than one traveler stopped to thank her as she passed. She accepted each comment with a modest smile. She had not changed the outcome. She had simply chosen not to ignore the truth. Yet everyone understood how rare that choice could be when pressure, assumptions, and authority all pointed in a different direction. Captain Richard Cole made a brief announcement before departure. His words were professional, but one sentence stood out. He thanked the passengers for their patience and reaffirmed the airline's commitment to fairness, accountability, and respect. Many people understood exactly why he said it. Others simply listened quietly. Even those who had only witnessed fragments of the confrontation sensed that the message carried more weight than a routine corporate statement. Nicole remained absent from the cabin. Executive Compliance had already begun its review. The process would continue long after the flight landed. Records would be examined. Timelines reconstructed. Decisions evaluated. Policies reviewed. Marcus looked out the window as the aircraft climbed through the clouds. The city below disappeared beneath a blanket of white. For a moment he thought about that younger version of himself standing in an airport terminal years ago, being asked to step aside and explain why he belonged. He remembered the feeling clearly. Not anger, not embarrassment, something quieter. The exhausting realization that he would need to prove what others were allowed to assume. Back then he believed success would eventually silence every doubt. Experience had taught him something different. Doubt does not disappear on its own. It survives in assumptions. It hides inside habits. It grows whenever people stop questioning easy conclusions. Jennifer leaned across the aisle. Can I ask you something? Marcus smiled. Of course. She hesitated for a second. Why did you stay so calm? Marcus looked around the cabin before answering. Because anger would have made the story about my reaction. Calm kept the story focused on the facts. Jennifer nodded slowly. The answer seemed to settle over several nearby passengers who had been listening. One businessman quietly closed his laptop. A woman near the window lowered the magazine she had been pretending to read. Marcus continued. The problem was never one's seat. The problem was how quickly people decided who deserved it. Nobody responded immediately because there was nothing to add. The truth had already been spoken. The statement carried a weight that reached beyond the aircraft itself. It applied to offices, schools, restaurants, neighborhoods, and countless everyday interactions where assumptions often arrive before understanding. A few minutes later, the cabin lights dimmed. Conversations faded. Laptops opened. Coffee cups rested on tray tables. The flight finally felt normal again. Flight attendants moved quietly through the aisle while passengers settled into the familiar rhythm of travel. Yet everyone who witnessed those events understood they would remember this trip long after they forgot the flight number. Not because a powerful man revealed who he was. Not because corporate messages appeared. Not because an audit had begun. They would remember it because they saw how easily appearances can shape judgment and how important it is for someone to challenge that judgment when it is wrong. They had watched facts compete with assumptions and had seen what happened when someone refused to surrender either dignity or composure. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment as the aircraft continued westward through the night sky. He had not raised his voice. He had not demanded special treatment. He had simply insisted on one standard for everyone. And sometimes that is the most powerful statement a person can make. Not because it changes a single situation, but because it reminds everyone watching what fairness is supposed to look like when nobody receives exceptions, nobody is judged by appearances, and every person is given the same chance to belong before being asked to prove that they do.